5 centuries of dueling history.
These are psychopathic killers.
From the passion of the nobility and the arrogance of a celebrated actress to the courage of contemporary German fraternity.
When you get hit, it's like a very icy feeling. You feel cold blood run down your face.
The bold, the brazen, the bizarre.
Au mouchoir. 2, 3.
Why they do.
If you don't like the shape of a fella's moustache, you tell him so, and he challenges you, you fight him.
Who they do, how they do.
In the blade, there's a vein, there's an artery, and there's a nerve. You can know a lot about your opponent by just touching his weapon.
Rapiers, daggers, pistols at 20 paces. The history of deadly duels. Duels of honor. Honor, courage, fraternity, and justice. The history of mankind has been a story of defining, balancing, and extolling these virtues. Over the last 500 years, at their heart has been the duel of honor, a single combat, man against man, to resolve a question of integrity. Sometimes by law, sometimes by custom. Its code of behavior, code of honor, has touched every part of life and defined each generation. It's an extraordinary history that traces its roots back to the fall of the Roman Empire. 500 years after the birth of Christ, semi-nomadic invaders, barbarians, conquered the lands of the dying Roman Empire. With them, they brought warrior customs and laws, and a warrior code of behavior to resolve disputes over property and criminal acts. Their leaders sanctioned and governed fights between the plaintiff and defendant. These deadly judicial duels were known as trials by combat.
They were crazy. in our terms, they were absolutely nuts. It was very much this total belief in the power of God. When you were put up to fight for your guilt or innocence, it was assumed absolutely that if you were innocent, okay, him above would look after you.
Five centuries later, following the new millennium, it was the age of the knight. These military horsemen shared the barbarian's hunger for combat and expanded his codes of behavior to include loyalty to the church, his master, and his lady. Their leader, the king, also used single combat to resolve disputes. But these duels of chivalry now covered wider issues of integrity, whether a knight was a liar, whether he was loyal, whether he was brave.
You have to remember that these knights had been raised in the cult of chivalry, and from an early age they had been rigorously trained that honor is everything, that you must display your courage, that you must display your loyalty, and that if these things were challenged in some way, it was absolutely essential for you to remove the stain.
The last duel of chivalry was also the first duel of honor. French nobleman and kinsman Guy Chabot de Jarnac and François de la Chataigneraie met in Paris in 1547. At issue was an accusation that Jarnac had had sexual relations with his own mother-in-law, and Jarnac's counter-accusation that La Chataigneraie was a liar. Like a duel of chivalry, this single combat was sanctioned and supervised by the king, Henry II. But unlike a duel of chivalry, When Henry had an opportunity to intercede, judge the duel, and proclaim a winner, he said nothing. A public duel of chivalry became one of the first private duels of honor.
Mais il y a des duels sans roi, sans jugement.
In the duel of honor, there is no judge. One doesn't have to prove that one is the good guy and the other the bad guy. One has to prove one's honor. To prove one's honor, you have to prove that you are not afraid.
After the 16th century and this important watershed, there were no more winners and losers. And obviously, someone might be killed, someone might be badly wounded, and his opponent not wounded at all. But it was not regarded as a stain upon his character to have been wounded or to lose a duel, so to speak. What was important is that he show courage and valor and understand and respect the rules of the duel in the course of the encounter.
It seems to me that if people go around having learnt the art of fencing, and practice, and go around picking quarrels with people just so that they can have a fight and kill them, and it seems to me that these are psychopathic killers.
Over the next 75 years, in Europe and particularly France, private, unsanctioned, and often illegal duels of honor became a craze. Thousands of noblemen died on the fields of honor. Some credit this craze to the declining cost and increasing availability of swords. Others credit an explosion of publishing and how-to manuals on fencing. But most find the roots of the duel of honor in the new and heightened sense of honor and codes of behavior associated with the Renaissance.
Renaissance people were interested in glory. They were interested in their personal achievements. Artists signed their works. All of this kind of emphasis on the individual also meant that you now had an emphasis on your own prestige and your own honor.
Honor did have value in that period. For instance, if you lost your honor, you could not own land, you could not buy bread. Basically, you were banished, or other people had the right to punish you or, hunt you down. So you really could not survive in a, very tight-knit society.
The first and true profession of the courtier must be that of arms. And this, above everything else, I wish him to pursue vigorously. And he will win a good reputation by demonstrating these qualities whenever and wherever possible, since failure to do so always incurs the gravest censure.
Publications like Baldassare Castiglione's Book of the Courtier define the standards for a gentleman's behavior. They created a consensus in Europe and reinforced the code of honor and the rules of dueling. Central to the code in dueling was the correct way to respond to an insult, how to remove a stain on a gentleman's honor.
Once you get up into the 16th century, particularly, among the, let's call them gentry, for want of a better word, the point of honor was an awful thing because you fought about it, and it didn't necessarily mean if you don't like the shape of a fellow's moustache, you tell him so, and he challenges you, you fight him.
These insults could be as trivial as a simple act of omission, like failing to say hello or greet a fellow gentleman. At the next level, there was the more personal insult, a public slur on another man's fame or reputation, something like being called a coward. An even greater affront was to insult a woman and thereby offend the man who protected her. One of the most famous duels of the early modern era involved an insult to a woman. The offender, however, was not a man, but another woman in a man's clothing. She was the celebrated actress La Maupin. While at a costume ball, La Maupin, dressed as a man, insulted a female guest. Three men, thinking another man had insulted the woman, defended her. La Maupin challenged all three to a duel. Not only did these men fail to realize that they were fighting a woman, but they were also unaware that their adversary had been training with one of France's greatest fencing masters, who happened to be her lover. With the deft use of her fencing skills, La Maupin killed all 3 men without sustaining even a nick. There were 2 even greater insults than disparaging the character of a woman. The first was to accuse a gentleman of not telling the truth. To call another man a liar was known as giving the lie.
I still find it very difficult to understand quite why this was regarded as such a ghastly insult. As I said, you know, it's worse to be called a liar than to be accused of incest with your mother-in-law.
C'est difficile à comprendre pour nous.
It's difficult for us to understand in the 20th century. I think your word was very important. The Word of God is the Bible. The Word is divine. If someone lied, the whole human contract fell apart. The Word was sacred.
But the greatest assault on honor was to invade a man's personal, physical space. Touch his face, his chin, his mouth, nose, and certainly to slap him on the cheek.
This is regarded as the greatest affront a man could suffer. Striking or touching another man was a very, very difficult, it was the last straw, so to speak.
Usually if it just remained words, you might be able to work it out. But once you spit in somebody's face, once you slap somebody, it was virtually impossible for that person to achieve some kind of reconciliation.
Once honor was stained and one of the gentlemen felt a deadly duel was the only solution, the next step was the challenge. In the 16th and 17th centuries, it was a written challenge, a cartel.
Sir, you have given me great offense with your impudent remarks. If you have the courage to defend your unforgivable words, meet me on the field of honor.
The cartel was rarely delivered by the challenger. This was the job of his second. In general, the seconds, following the rules of the Code of Honor, negotiated the details of the duel. They determined where the duel would be fought, the severity of the duel, whether it was fought to first blood or to the death. They looked out for the best interests of the duelists, and in many cases tried to resolve the dispute before it came to combat. In a later era, the famous French duelist and writer Guy de Maupassant acted on behalf of a friend as his second. Unlike de Maupassant, his friend was a poor shot. The writer's clever ruse was a marvelous example of crafty negotiation.
He wants to prevent a duel, but because it's a code of honor, they have to meet each other. But how is Guy de Maupassant getting about it? Crafty as he is. He has these little markers, you know, where you can see how well you've been shooting. It's a little cotton card, little rows in the middle, they call it, and you can see exactly how many shots were well fired or went aside. Now, he puts 3 cartons, 3 of these markers, he puts, very nonchalantly, he puts them out on the table. Baron de Vaux calls, the servant of Guy de Maupassant lets him in, and he brings him to the room where Guy de Maupassant is just sitting. Guy de Maupassant said, "Do you want to have a drink?" He said, "Yes." And he's sitting down in a chair. He pours out a drink and he said, "Oh, maybe you want another drink." This is just to get out of the room. Because he wants this Baron to look around. Because in front of the Baron, on the table, are the 3 markers, are the 3 cards. So he said, "I want to get another wine. I'll be back in a minute." He gets out of the room. And the Baron is looking around and he sees these markers and he also sees that the man who has shot at them is a very good shot. And then the Guy de Maupassant comes back into the room and he said, "Okay, well, what are we doing? Are we going to have it here or there?" And before he can go on, the Baron said, "Sorry, Guy, but they are yours? Because you're a very good shot, aren't you?" He said, "No, they're not mine. They're for my friend, that your friend wants to have a duel with." So the duel is called off, because de Vaux also likes his friends. And he says, "Look, you better not have a duel with him, because he certainly is going to kill you," not knowing that the markers were Guy de Maupassant.
Wounds of the flesh a surgeon's skill may heal, but wounded honours only cured with steel. And this, of course, is the weapon that would avenge your honor.
The second also participated with the duelist in the selection of the weapons. Usually the man who received the challenge had the right to propose the weapon. Though simple guns did exist in the 16th and 17th century, the offensive weapon of choice was the rapier. The rapier was designed specifically for thrusting. It was ideal for single combat and dueling. To a gentleman, a rapier showed his status, as well as his willingness to defend his honor.
There is something about a bladed weapon that causes you to want to pick it up. You can see this in small children playing their games of knights of old, big, bad and bold. A weapon such as this is about showing off. It's not about killing. Fitting a pistol to a sword such as this is not really going to do you a tremendous amount of use in terms of a street brawl or indeed perhaps a duel. But nonetheless it does delight the eye. It does thrill the mind to enjoy the complex mechanical attributes of a weapon like this, and also to enjoy the beauty of the decoration and the fact that you're telling all your fellow men, look how rich I am, look how important I am. That's what this sword is telling you.
In addition to the rapier, a gentleman usually carried a defensive weapon. Some gentlemen chose a small shield known as a buckler. Others used gloves or cloaks. But because it could be worn at the side and acted as both an offensive and defensive weapon, most chose to use a dagger. The daggers could double as eating knives. Many were designed specifically to counter or parry blows, and some daggers, crafted to catch and break swords, were truly bizarre contraptions.
With a dagger such as this, a triple-bladed left-hand dagger, you could disconcert your enemy. And not only could you entrap his blade in the guard, but also in the three blades of the dagger itself.
With the challenge accepted, the weapons chosen, and the details negotiated, there was still the matter of preparing for the duel. There could be days, even weeks of practice, and this led to the rise of fencing masters and fencing academies.
This is a fencing room where you were taught how to prepare for a duel or how to fence for the rest of your life. To enjoy the company of a good fencing master, his spirit, the secret strokes.
Fencing masters had been around for centuries, and in general their status had been modest. But in the 16th, 17th, and 18th centuries, with this passion for defending one's honor, with this explosion of dueling and sword fighting, their academies and the masters themselves became celebrities, even sex symbols.
You didn't just take a fencing lesson from him, he taught you other things. He taught you very often horse riding. He very often taught you dancing. They were very often brilliant in conversation. Some people say the sword, the foil, is a phallic symbol. He was agile, he was handsome, he was charming. The combinations of intelligence and athletic performance. They were well built. They had the sword hanging there, it's romantic, it's exciting. And the woman would look at that man and say, I feel attracted to him.
Then came the duel itself. The combatants usually met at sunrise, accompanied by their seconds and, when possible, a doctor. All eyes were on the duelist's attitude, comportment, and behavior.
Nobody likes to die. Nobody likes to get hurt. Nobody wants to have pain. 3 reasons why you are afraid of a duel. I mean, it is something terrible. You could be killed. You could get hurt. And that's why. But the will to do it, you want it so much that you overcome it.
what was most important is that both men behaved in a certain way. In other words, what was under scrutiny in a duel was a man's comportment at the scene of the duel, the way in which he acted prior to the duel, whether or not he showed nervousness, whether he, in the course of the duel, acted honorably.
From anxiety to terror, the duel began. Concentration, thrusting, parrying. They touched swords.
In the blade, there's a vein, there's an artery, and there's a nerve. And when we engage those blades, we make contact in many ways. You can know a lot about your opponent by just touching his weapon.
And there was a hit.
You feel it kind of pop you, and then you look down at it, and it's quite surprising. You're looking at the inside of your body, and then it starts to hurt and bleed.
If this was a duel to the death, it could be the beginning of the end. If it was only to first drawn blood, the duel could be over. In either case, at this point, the seconds would have come forward and attempted to end the duel. Under the best of circumstances, both duelists would have agreed that honor was satisfied and put down their weapons. Both would leave the field with their honor intact. Surprisingly, throughout history, they also often left the field with a new friend.
When you face somebody with a steel blade, with a sharp blade in your hand, and the other one has the same thing, it makes everything around you so unimportant. And in the end, very often they find that where they had the quarrel about maybe could have been talked over or settled in a different way, but they did it with the swords. But afterwards, very often they make up. They become even friends. It's amazing.
One of my favorite stories that came out of Austria-Hungary was a fellow, he was a Jewish fellow who was quite a sportsman, a well-known fencer, who was sitting in a Weinstube someplace, and these 6 or 7 guys came in, and one of them yelled out to the bartender, they'd already had something to drink, yelled out, "Bartender, bring me a glass of wine in a glass from which no Jew is drunk." Now, this is classic kind of Austrian anti-Semitism. And the fellow at the other table, who was Jewish and quite a well-known fencer and duelist, went up to his hotel room above, and he got his chamber pot. And he brought it down, and he set it in front of this guy, and he said, "Here, no Jew is drunk from this." And that particular incident brought on 7 different duels. He had to duel everybody at the table. And he did, and they all became fast friends.
In the years between the Renaissance and the French Revolution, gentlemen fought thousands and thousands of duels. Countless lives were lost. Some of the best-known people in history fought duels of honor. Don Juan was expelled from Russia for dueling. Cyrano de Bergerac never left his home without his pen and rapier. The painter Caravaggio killed a critic in Rome. And writers like Shakespeare, Molière, and Cervantes documented and ridiculed the duel.
I think Shakespeare saw the duel, the private duel between men, as a really somewhat ridiculous custom that was wasteful of life.
Thou wilt quarrel with a man that hath a hair more or a hair less in his beard than thou hast. Thou wilt quarrel with a man for cracking nuts, having no other reason but because thou hast hazel eyes.
And it's all hollow. And I think he sees a lot of posturing and puffing and, strutting men in big costumes with big swords, and then a useless loss of life.
Some people have been known to have more than 300 duels. Some other people had only 1.
And how often did these gentlemen fight? Some older codes stated that a man was not a man unless he fought at least 4 duels. It appears that multiple duels were common in all eras. Many gentlemen were said to have dueled dozens of times. And though numbers can be exaggerated, today there is some hard evidence.
I found it in an umbrella stand, completely rusted, in the flea market of Paris, and the text could not be read. It was one heap of rust. I cleaned it, and then to my surprise I found this fantastic text which was on it. Offert par ses camarades de la libre parole à Raymond Villon à l'occasion de son 12e duel, which means given to Raymond Villon by his comrades on the occasion of his 12th duel. So at least this man had 12 duels.
Considering the rampant killing of noblemen throughout the early modern era, one would expect opposition and prosecution by monarchs in the courts. And in truth, there were many bans against dueling. But most of these bans were only half-hearted, and frequently dueling noblemen were given pardons. Monarchs, particularly the French kings, found themselves in a real dilemma.
They profited from the fact that the warriors on whom their throne depended needed to demonstrate their courage. They needed to be a courageous class, but they couldn't have them killing themselves off at the same time at a rapid rate. They needed testimonials and demonstrations of courage, but they needed to put a brake on it at the same time. So there was a kind of an extraordinary equilibrium that took place between the exercise of royal authority over nobles and noble dueling and the desire to still continue to have the expression of courage and valor that dueling represented.
But by the close of the 18th century, Europe was changing dramatically. The French Revolution led to the beheading of one of Europe's most powerful monarchs. Parliamentary democracy appeared. The new middle class, wealthy merchants, doctors, lawyers, politicians, and journalists was rising and sharing elite status with the old nobility. And with this new social status, they acquired a taste for dueling.
In many ways, dueling was a form of social mobility. If you were willing to defend your honor, if you were willing to duel, this puts you in a new class, a kind of combined class of haute bourgeois and nobility. And it really could raise you in terms of social status.
La meilleure façon de prouver que l'on est noble, c'est...
The best way to prove that you are a nobleman is to die like one. After that, you are certain you did not fail in keeping your promise. Nobody doubts it anymore. Therefore, the last word has to be a word of courage, a word of honor. That is proof, irrefutable proof that one is noble. A duel is the best proof that one who does not talk like a nobleman, who started by selling fabrics or by working in a bank, really is a nobleman. Not only did he socialize with noblemen, his children married the children of noblemen, he went into debt like a nobleman, but he died like a nobleman. He ceased to care for his life.
This new middle class often dueled over issues of political and personal slander. But as in the past, they also dueled over everything from the most passionate romance to the most trivial insult.
What I find interesting is the trivial things that people would duel over in 19th century Europe in general, and Italy specifically. Looking too long in other people's eyes, staring at a person for too long and not blinking. Refusing to salute somebody on the street, refusing to bow, tip your hat. Could be the cause of a duel. And one great duel that I ran across was a duel of two guys who had met in a railroad carriage, and one had his feet up on the seat next to him and refused to take his feet down. And when the young military officer said, "You've got to move your feet," this guy insulted him. And so they virtually stopped the train, or they got to the next station. They went out, they got seconds, they fought the duel, and the fellow was killed for not, for not taking his feet off the seat.
The greatest romantic duel of them all may have been fought between Barons Troutmansdorf and Van Ropp over the young Countess Lodoiska. It seems that Troutmansdorf was successfully courting the Countess when another love-struck suitor, Van Ropp, insulted him. They agreed to a duel, and as military men selected sabers as their weapons. However, invoking ancient custom, Van Ropp brought a champion, an expert stand-in to fight on his behalf. Von Ropp's champion quickly dispatched Trautmannsdorf. But there was more. Trautmannsdorf's second, irate at the death of the Baron, picked up his sword and attacked Von Ropp. Von Ropp, like his champion, came out the better, but it was small consolation. When Von Ropp inspected his dead opponent, he realized Trautmannsdorf's second was none other than the woman he loved, Countess Ladoyska. Left with no reason to live, Von Ropp fell on his own sword. By the late 18th century, the pistol, which had existed for hundreds of years, was improving and developing into the preferred dueling weapon. It could kill an opponent at a much greater distance, and even an inexperienced duelist had a chance to succeed.
A lot of it had to do with the fact that becoming an expert using a saber or a rapier, an épée as the French called it, involved an enormous amount of practice, development of a technique, and an extraordinary amount of physical vigor. It was not something that just any man could do. But any man could stand and hold a gun in his hand and point it in the general direction of his opponent and pull the trigger.
It is a modified fencing mask, but meant for pistol shooting or a duel with revolvers or pistols.
Not surprisingly, along with a passion for dueling with pistols came pistol masters, shooting schools, and clubs. Though little is known about them, there are some leftover artifacts, including this protective practice mask.
A normal fencing mask would have one mesh wire. This is double-layer mesh wire. There's a glass visor in it, which is about ½ an inch thick. There's a special protection for the mouth, and they would shoot at each other with bullets made out of wax, just to pretend that they had a real duel.
This was also the age of the bizarre duel, and there were newspapers and tabloids hungry to report them. Duels between women, iron workers, woodsmen, and farmers, with pitchforks, sandbags, even one on bicycles. But the weirdest duel of all may have also been the most deadly. It was a French duel called the Duel au mouchoir, the duel with a handkerchief. It was invented in the early 19th century by two close friends, one who insulted the character of the other's mistress. They began their duel with swords, but soon found they were too evenly matched. Neither could get the advantage. Their solution was to move on to pistols at a dangerously close range.
Au mouchoir.
They would use a handkerchief held between them to determine the distance. Their seconds were horrified, but couldn't persuade the duelists to change their minds. The seconds did, however, convince the duelists to allow them to load only one pistol, and therefore save at least one life. The duelists selected their weapons. Neither knowing who had the loaded gun, each holding an end of the handkerchief with his free hand, they took their positions.
1, 2, 3.
They fired. The accused slanderer fell to the ground, soon to die. His opponent, once his friend, and the offended mistress were vindicated. Throughout the 19th century, public, political, royal, and ecclesiastical criticism of dueling continued. And as in the past, the pleas and prohibitions were rarely heeded. There was one notable exception, however, and that was Frederick the Great of Prussia. He had a unique way of getting his message across to his soldiers.
Two of his officers had quarreled, and one had challenged the other, and they were actually appealing to the king to grant permission to fight that duel. And he said, okay, you go and fight. Where's it gonna be? And they told him where they wanted to meet, and at night Frederick had a
a gallows built in that spot, and when the two officers were arriving there with their entourage in the morning, they found the king sitting there on a chair next to that gallows, and when they were asking what that thing was for, he said, well, after you're done, I will hang the survivor right here.
By the end of the 19th century, the duel of honor was fading away. Explanations include the rise of courts and laws, the disappearance of the sword in civilian dress, and the frightening deadliness of the pistol. Also credited are the decline of aristocracies, increasing social mobility, changing mores, and maybe most of all, the horror of modern warfare.
I think that it's partly that legislation is more effective than it had been in the past. The rule of law is stronger. I think people's sense of personal honor is they're less touchy about this. And then, of course, people no longer, hadn't from the late 18th century, mid to late 18th century, no longer carried swords as an article of civilian dress.
Because the mores and the values changed, they kept the value of honor, but it decreased, became more marginal. It was not at the center of society anymore.
It's a question of rank. That's what honor is about. And honor is not a factor in modern day society. How many times do we talk about honor? Well, it's because we live, at least as Americans, we live in a democracy where rank and hierarchy are not at least publicly acknowledged.
The scale of the killing and the murderousness of World War I made the kinds of risks that men took on the dueling ground with ancient instruments, made those kinds of risks of human life look ridiculous.
But dueling hasn't completely disappeared. In the land where some people say the duel originated, in Austria and Germany, there is a form still alive today. It's a fraternity initiation rite known as the Minsur. The Minsur traces its roots back to the 18th century, when the common dueling sword was causing numerous deaths to young students from bloody puncture wounds to the chest.
You see, on early pictures, you often see, when it was thrusting, fencing by thrusting, you often can see students who have the left hand on their mouth. That's why, because if they were hurt, you don't have any receptors of pain in that district. So in the duel, you don't know how deep the wound is and how deep you're hurt. And they try to find out if there is coming some blood, a bloody foam there. And if it did, they knew I'm going to die very, very soon.
In order to decrease fatalities, but maintain the code of honor dueling supported, proponents of the Minsur promoted a style that used a less deadly slashing and cutting sword called a Schlager. They also limited foot movement to a steadfast standstill that some believe originated in the rigid and disciplined requirements of the 18th century's square fighting technique.
If you look at how, for example, infantry operated in the Napoleonic Wars, in the Carte and the square, you will see that the behavior of these, even the common soldiers, they ridiculed each other when there was a cannonball coming, flying straight ahead, just whizzing by their ears, and they dodged. They would be, people would laugh at them. Their own comrades at arms would laugh at them, because the requirements of the square meant it's a mass of people that has to operate very organized, in a very organized fashion. To be effective, you can't have people dodging left and right.
The outcome of this dueling technique was essentially a test of bravery performed not to resolve a dispute, but to prove that a man had the courage to stand firm under pressure and endure injuries. Scars that became emblems of superior class status and masculinity.
And they also symbolize potency, right? And that a very masculine quality, and that the bearer of the scar would be a good provider, right? Because he was a potent man, and women thought they were wonderful. They thought, by all accounts, they would, they would go into half swoons when they would see a real jagged Schmiss, is what the Germans called it, adorning a young man's face.
Today, in university towns like Göttingen, Germany, the past and present of the Mensur are alive. In recently uncovered portions of an administration building, the university has discovered a remarkable record of 18th and 19th century life in a group of student prison cells.
Yeah, sometimes the people who come in here were people who have fight forbidden mensurs, and so the university puts the people in here because they are seen by fighting forbidden duels or forbidden mensurs. And you can see that most of the people who have sit in here have fight mensurs too.
On the walls, you can see graffiti left behind by the students, representations of their Mensur duels, of the Schlager, and their fraternity shields. For visiting students, it's a connection to former members of their fraternities. And for some visitors, it's even a connection to family members.
Yeah, you see this name called Hane, it's my name too, and when I come in first time in the Carte, I found a couple of signs with my name, and so I looked in old archives in this university and found out that my grandpa, Ernst Hane, who studied here medicine in 1910, has sitting in here in quite this room for 5 times. I know also he fences a couple of mensuren, and it was very funny for me to find my own grandpa on the wall. My grandma is living, and I told her that I found her husband, and she was not amused that I can find out that my grandpa is sitting in here.
The Mensur is not just a thing of the past in Göttingen. In fraternity houses like this one, students are still using the Mensur as a demonstration of comradeship, a tool to cultivate courage, and an initiation rite. One of the country's best-known fight masters is Pitt Pieper. He received his scar in an early Mensur duel.
The first years I had problems with it because it was a bit difficult, more difficult for me to laugh, for example, and in winter it was was hurting a bit. But now, you know, if you see it for some years, it belongs to me. It's a part of me.
There are about 20 men who live in this fraternity house. They come from all over Germany, and each will live here for about 2 years. And if all goes well, successfully perform 4 Mensur duels. They have varying religious backgrounds and political beliefs, but all of them shared a common interest in joining a dueling fraternity.
First, because of all the nice guys I met here, and secondly, probably because my father joined the fraternity 50 years ago, so it's quite a kind of tradition in our family, and because it's a very different way of spending the student's life.
I'd like to call it a kinship of choice that you enter into. Goethe has this term Wahlverwandtschaft. It's much closer than your friends from school. This is something that is really lasts a lifetime.
And it shows that I can stand a situation of extremes, and it feels incredibly comfortable and incredibly relieving afterwards. It's just a great feeling. It's like some people do extreme sports or something. I think it's in the feeling afterwards probably the same.
The duel itself is a highly ritualized fight. The 2 combatants are equally matched and well protected except on their heads and cheeks. The duelists come from different fraternities and may or may not know each other. They fight in rounds of between 4 and 8 strokes, as many as 40 rounds to a duel. Huge emphasis is put on standing perfectly still while giving and receiving blows. The actual encounter is a combination of terror and exhilaration.
Ansonsten Silenzium für eine so annoncierte Partie.
Your mouth is dry, your stomach is weak, your throat just goes up and down. And this opponent is looking at you, you just see the eyes flickering. And suddenly you have a blade in your hand and your arm gets thrown up. hear the loose, the go command there. You can't show emotion. You can't show reflexes. You have to keep yourself under control. Then you get hit, you know, it's just like a very icy feeling. You feel cold blood run down your face, and it's over, you know, as quickly as you can think. And you're so glad that everything is over at the end, that your opponent suddenly is your best friend.
Actual duels are rarely, if ever, viewed by the public. Many of these fraternities are still secretive and concerned about public criticism. But we were able to see some of the preparation for one fraternity member's mensur. And the next morning, we asked him how it went.
We started, and first thing I thought was, what am I doing here? It's 20th century, but after a few seconds, I was concentrated and it was okay. And the other guy, he moved his head a little bit, like that, and it's not allowed. He showed his fear. I was feared too, but I didn't show it. And he showed it to his people, and his people stopped the whole thing, took him out, and he has to try another time.
And now where is this fraternity brother off to?
I'm going to visit my mother, because she wants to see me, if I'm all right. She was nervous, and next time I'm not going to tell her.
Will the mensur continue, or will it fade away and disappear as the last gasp of an outdated dueling custom? All unknown. But it's clear that codes of behavior that encourage fraternity, promote honor, and resolve disputes are still important today. Some even suggest that the dueling tradition may have advantages over the modern justice system.
If it's well organized, if it's done honestly, very often, this is amazing, after the duel, they make up. When you see two parties in court, very often, both of them are not satisfied after the court case is over. They don't even shake hands. And this is a beautiful cleansing thing of a duel. People don't agree on, they do not agree on something. They have a duel, what happens? Afterwards they make up. They embrace each other and say, it's over now. We have it out. We had it out, and this is a big difference between a duel and a court case. The duel can clean. The court case very often doesn't.
Some people suggest that maybe, tabloids would be more careful if people had to defend their words with blood. And a friend of mine who works for the court system, the federal court system, actually found a case for me where I believe it was a federal judge, at one point in a case suggested that the two lawyers really that their actions were leading him to wish that the duel could be reinstated, and that they would act more civil in court if they really had to go out and defend themselves against each other's outrages.
Courage, honor, justice, fraternity, the keys to dueling and Western civilization's code of honor. It was the standard for controlling aggression, for resolving disputes, for defining position, and sharing camaraderie. It defined and dominated the lives of men of honor over 1,500 years of deadly duels.